Well, we find ourselves halfway through May. Turkey season is closing awful rapidly, and our minds are already starting to shift towards whitetails. But it's a little early to be thinking about individual velvet bucks or even summertime velvet inventory. It's a little early for that. But the end of May, beginning of June, we start to see fawns drop. And with fawn trail camera photos and videos, there is some tangible information that you can kind of put together that can help you this coming season. It could tell you a little bit about your property, about peak breeding, and also tell you when to be in the woods. So with that, we're going to walk through a couple of examples. There's a couple things to keep in mind here. Number one is there is a little bit of guesswork. The chances of you getting a trail camera photo or video of a fawn the day that it drops is pretty unlikely. You know, it takes a couple days for them to get their walking legs underneath them, and even at that, they're not walking around and moving a whole bunch. So you kind of have to backdate some of this stuff with your best guess. The second thing to keep in mind is the gestation period of a whitetail. That time frame is approximately 201 or 203 days. So let's call it 201 days plus or minus a couple of days, depending on how that doe actually carries that fawn or twins or triplets. So let's walk through an example of two different parcels. Let's say you have a piece in Wisconsin and you have a piece in Kentucky. You're running trail cameras on both of them year round. On the Wisconsin piece, your first fawn photos come in June 1st. Assuming that those fawns are 3 or 4 days old, knowing that the gestation period, again, is approximately 201 days, we can count backwards and figure out what that conception date actually is. So that doe was bred somewhere November 7th, plus or minus a day or two. And again, that's not rocket science. Does get bred in November. I think we all realize that. That happens on a bell curve. The early born fawns are on the beginning side of that bell curve, and then late born fawns are on the back end of that bell curve. And the majority happens, that 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th of November. Not rocket science, right? But knowing that that doe was bred November 7th, we can say on that property, 2 or 3 days before that is probably a good time to be in the woods. Again, not rocket science here. But when we look at the Kentucky piece and we say our first fawn photos did not come in until June 15th, there's a 2-week discrepancy there. Again, assuming that that fawn is 2 or 3, 4 days old, again, counting backwards that gestation period, that June 15th photo tells us that that doe was bred 2 weeks later, so let's call it November 21st. In this scenario, when you see these trends year over year over year stay consistent, so on your Wisconsin piece, you see fawns being dropped around June 1st, and your first trail camera photos of fawns in the Kentucky piece are around June 15th. If you see that trend continue, that is telling you that you have the ability to hunt peak times during the rut on 2 different parcels weeks apart. You can count backwards on the Wisconsin piece and say you want to be in the woods from November 1st to November 6th, November 7th. And then on Kentucky piece, you can backdate that 2 weeks and say, okay, I need to be in the woods November 14th to the 21st. So again, this stuff is not rocket science. We all know what happens in November. But when you start to look at data with a critical mindset, the data coming from your trail cameras, you can start to look at these things, these phenomenons or these trends year over year on your parcel and put more clues together. Another thing is, some people say there's a second rut. Some people talk about a rut that just drags out. And again, everything happens on one bell curve and that's one rut. But oftentimes, I know from personal experience on several pieces of public, there's areas that get hot buck activity January 1st. And I've always tied that to yearling fawns coming to sexual maturity. So their body weight is, 80 plus pounds, 70 plus pounds, whatever that number is. They come into estrus. You see that during the season, but in areas that you may have not run cameras last fall, last winter, and maybe you just have cameras out starting this summer and you see those late born fawns, that's telling you that those does are being bred late. And again, if those fawns, that first fawn photo isn't coming until June 30th, and again, the fawn's a few days old, you can use that gestation period and say, okay, well that doe wasn't bred until December 1st, or you can even take that back a date. I used that January 1st example. If you have fawns being born into July, that's going to tell you the latter part of December, the early part of January could be a good time to be in the woods. So again, all of this is, none of it's rocket science, but I think oftentimes guys are overlooking what they can get out of their trail camera photos in May and June. And for us, those fawn pictures are a big part of it.